It was 1978. A boy named Jose, just 16 years old, lived with his family on a peaceful ranch near the rural community of Erlenmark, close to Larry County. Their home was a picturesque setting, surrounded by the lush vineyards of California. Life seemed simple, but one day, everything changed when his sister, Cecilia, approached him with an unusual request. Cecilia asked Jose to accompany her to a small house where she wanted to meet a friend. Despite his reservations, Jose agreed and took her there. Something about the place made him uneasy, so he chose not to go inside with her. Hours passed, and their mother grew worried when Cecilia didn't return home. Soon after, they discovered her car abandoned, and later, the worst news arrived. Cecilia's lifeless body was found. Jose was the last person to see his sister alive. When the police questioned him, he gave a witness statement but held back the full truth. He didn't trust the authorities to find the people responsible. He wanted to take matters into his own hands. Driven by a thirst for justice or perhaps revenge, Jose returned to that small house. He broke in and unalived the person he believed to be responsible. But he didn't stop there. 2 more individuals were inside the house, and Jose unalived them both, completing a brutal triple homicide, all at just 16 years old. This act of violence marked the beginning of Jose's deadly path. Over the next few decades, he would claim the lives of more than 30 people, becoming one of the most feared hitmen associated with Mexican drug cartels. His victims were scattered across the U.S., with many of them meeting their end in his home county, Tulare. He unalived without discrimination. Whether they were young or old, drug dealers or innocent workers, fathers or husbands, none were safe. For over 30 years, authorities from multiple states chased Jose, but his elusive nature made him difficult to catch. It wasn't until years of investigations, coordinated efforts, and sheer perseverance that they finally brought him to justice. This is the chilling story of Jose Manuel Martinez, also known as El Mano Negra, or the Black Hand, one of the deadliest assassins in American history. Journalist Jessica Garrison, author of The Devil's Harvest, met Jose in prison during a 2017 BuzzFeed News investigation. Her interactions with him revealed something surprising. Despite his horrific crimes, Jose could be incredibly charming. His family viewed him as a protector, the person who visited them in the hospital, lifted kids to windows for visits when they weren't allowed inside. It's hard to reconcile this caring image with the cold-blooded life-taker he became. Born in 1962 in Fresno, California, Jose was a U.S. citizen but spent much of his early life in Mexico. At age 11, his family moved to a ranch near Erlenmark in Tulare County, the poorest region in California at the time. His stepfather, who organized labor for the wine industry, was also involved in drug trafficking. By age 14, Jose was running drugs across borders, using his bilingual skills to stay off law enforcement's radar. In 1977, the police raided their ranch and seized over $2 million worth of heroin, along with a cache of weapons. His stepfather was arrested, and just a year later, Cecilia was unalived. According to Jose, that's when everything changed. He claimed he had been a good person until that day, but after his sister's death, he swore vengeance against those who exploited others, especially abusers. His first paid life-taking came in 1979. A friend informed him that David Bedoya had violated his sister, and for $500, Jose made him his first target. By 1982, he had caught the attention of a Mexican cartel, likely the Sinaloa cartel. It was here that he met a mysterious figure known only as Mr. X, setting him on the path to becoming one of the most feared hitmen in history. Mr. X operated in the shadows of the narcotics trade, overseeing the movement of large quantities of drugs from Mexico into California and beyond. He wasn't just a trafficker. He also managed a network of enforcers, with Jose Martinez among them. Many of Martinez's assignments involved intimidation and collecting debts from small-time dealers. Not every task required taking a life, but when radicalism was needed, Martinez was the one to call. Most drug deals worked on credit. Dealers received the product, sold it, and were expected to return the money. But if they failed to deliver, Martinez would be sent to recover the funds, by any means necessary. His work was primarily organized through quick phone calls or brief in-person meetings. Despite his role in these radical operations, Martinez spent time in jail for other reasons, mostly related to his drug-running activities. For instance, he was arrested in 1990 while acting as a courier, yet no life-taking charges ever stuck. This was perplexing, as his name surfaced in connection with multiple homicide cases dating back to 1979. It's understandable if someone gets tied to one life-taking case by chance, maybe even two, but 7 or 8. It's astonishing that no one made the connection at the time. It wasn't until much later, after a string of brutal life-taking, that law enforcement began to truly follow Martinez's trail. In November 2006, Martinez flew to Florida with a deadly mission. A 20-year-old named Javier Huerta had allegedly stolen 10 kilograms of illegal substance, valued at around $170,000. Martinez spent several days watching Huerta, waiting for the right moment. Then he set his plan into motion. Under the guise of being a customer, Martinez contacted Huerta, asking for an estimate on some construction work. When Huerta arrived, Martinez locked the door behind him. With a cold, calculated tone, he informed Huerta that he knew about the stolen drugs. "If you don't pay me within 30 minutes, he warned, "I'll call my associate outside, and your family will pay the price." Frightened, Huerta revealed that the money was buried in his backyard. Martinez recovered $150,000 but decided to unalive Huerta. He shot both Huerta and his colleague multiple times, bound their hands with zip ties, and stuffed their bodies into Huerta's truck. After dumping the vehicle near a national park, Martinez lit a cigarette, perhaps a moment of calm amid the chaos. Having finished the job, he flew straight to Alabama to celebrate his granddaughter's birthday. With some of his newfound money, he took her to Toys R Us, telling her to pick anything she wanted. As Martinez doted on his granddaughter, investigators in Florida were piecing together the crime. They found Huerta's truck and, inside it, a Mountain Dew can with a cigarette but floating in the liquid. DNA tests on the cigarette but would eventually yield results, but not right away. Meanwhile, Martinez remained free, untouched by law enforcement. It wasn't until 2009 that he took another contract, this time to unalive a man named Joaquin Barragan in Earlmart. For $8,000, Martinez used a woman as bait to lure Barragan into a trap. 3 days after the meeting, Barragan's body was discovered under a blanket, hands bound with zip ties, just like Huerta. Despite several witnesses pointing to Martinez, known by his alias El Mano Negra, or the Black Hand, the police lacked enough evidence to make the charges stick. However, they arrested him for a probation violation. When officers arrived at his home, Martinez quickly destroyed his phone's SIM card by swallowing it, leaving no digital evidence behind. During questioning, he denied everything, insisting the people of Earlmart were lying. Although Martinez passed several months in jail for the probation violation, he wasn't held long. Upon release, he returned to the Tulare County Sheriff's Office to retrieve his seized Chevy Suburban. In exchange for its return, he agreed to answer a few questions. During the conversation, he hinted at being a collector for a cartel based in Guadalajara and claimed that Barragan had been unalived not over a debt, but because he was a rat. Suspicious, investigators offered him a lie detector test. Though not legally binding, polygraph results often play a role in investigations. Martinez agreed to take the test and denied any involvement in Barragan's death. The test results, however, indicated deception, but without solid evidence or a confession, law enforcement couldn't make a definitive case. And so, once again, the notorious Black Hand slipped through their fingers. Meanwhile, the DNA on the cigarette but found in Huerta's truck was still sitting in a lab, waiting for someone to finally make the connection. In Florida, the authorities were swamped with cases, and the 2 bodies in the trunk were soon forgotten. It seemed like Jose Martinez might continue his deadly spree without consequence. However, everything changed in 2013, not in Florida, but in Alabama. By 2013, 35 years had passed since Martinez's sister was unalived, and 33 years since he unalived David Badella for $500. Now 51, Martinez found himself in Alabama once again, visiting his daughter and spending time with his grandchildren. He loved picking them up from school, dressing them as Disney princesses, and enjoying spa days with them. His daughter, aware of his criminal background, believed he was just involved in smuggling people across the border, unaware of his radical history. During one of these visits, Martinez learned that a friend of his daughter's partner, Jamie Romero, needed help collecting a debt. Martinez offered to assist, but his real motive was to gather information about Romero. He wanted to know if this man was worthy of his daughter. In the course of his investigation, Martinez met with a man named Jose Ruiz. As they drove together, Martinez asked Ruiz about Romero. Ruiz casually spoke poorly of his girlfriend, calling her terrible names and insulting her parenting skills. Unbeknownst to him, the woman he was talking about was Martinez's daughter. Upon realizing this, Martinez decided that Ruiz would pay for his words, but not immediately. Too many people had seen them together that day. Martinez returned to California, biding his time. But just a few weeks later, on March 4, 2013, he was back in Alabama. Martinez, Ruiz, and Romero went on a drive together, eventually stopping in a secluded area of a national park. Without warning, Martinez pulled out a fire weapon, pointed it at Ruiz, and said coldly, "The woman you insulted is my daughter." He fired Ruiz twice in the head. Calmly, Martinez got back into the car, instructing Romero, now in shock, to drive and keep his mouth shut. When Ruiz's body was discovered, police found a Walmart receipt in his possession. Surveillance footage from the store led investigators to Romero, who was arrested and charged for life-taking. Meanwhile, Martinez contacted the police, attempting to provide an alibi for Romero, claiming they were together during the time of the unalive. However, the authorities didn't believe his story, and Romero remained in custody. A month later, Martinez was visiting his son in Earlmart when suddenly there was a knock on the door. The police were outside, and Martinez immediately assumed that Romero had spoken to the authorities about him. Fearing arrest, he fled the house, with Sheriff Deputy Crystal Darrington hot on his heels. Ironically, Martinez had nothing to worry about. The police were not there because of the Alabama unalive. In reality, Deputy Darrington was investigating a series of robberies and wanted to speak with his son for assistance. When Martinez was eventually caught and brought to the station, one of Darrington's colleagues quietly informed her that the man she had just apprehended was El Mano Negra, a notorious contract life-taker suspected of numerous murders. Rather than charging him for possession of a firearm as a convicted felon, Martinez managed to convince the police to release him in exchange for helping them crack down on illegal guns circulating in the area. The police, thinking he was simply trying to avoid jail, agreed to let him assist with the operation. But Martinez's motivations were more complex. While he did want to avoid jail, he also had an ulterior motive: staying close to the police to see if they suspected him for the murders he'd committed, including the one in Alabama. While Martinez was busy collaborating with law enforcement in California, an old case in Florida, the one involving the bodies in the trunk, was quietly reopened, setting the stage for his eventual downfall. In 2006, the unalive of Javier Juerza seemed destined to be forgotten, until years later, investigators finally received the long-awaited DNA lab report from the cigarette butt found in the Mountain Dew can inside Juerza's truck. The DNA matched a man with a criminal record, Jose Manuel Martinez. Detective TJ Watts took the lead on the case, but even with the DNA hit, Martinez wasn't yet the prime suspect. Watts was puzzled as to why a cigarette from California would turn up at a crime scene in Florida. Curious, he reached out to a contact in California, who filled him in on Martinez's shady background. The California investigator revealed that Martinez was not only involved in several life-taking investigations, but he had also been helping local law enforcement with illegal weapons cases. Despite his apparent cooperation, they had never been able to pin any life-taking charges on him. However, the investigator casually mentioned a small but telling detail. Many of the life-taking tied to Martinez involved the use of zip ties. This intrigued Watts. He had his own batch of unsolved cases where zip ties played a significant role. Could Martinez be responsible for these murders too? Watts didn't see Martinez as a mere informant like his California colleagues. To him, Martinez was much more sinister, a life-taker. He officially marked Martinez as a person of interest. Meanwhile, in Alabama, Jamie Romero was still locked up, facing accusations for the life-taking of Jose Ruiz. Romero, fully aware of Martinez's cold-blooded nature, was terrified. But he also knew he couldn't afford to go to prison. He had a daughter to care for and a life to protect. Desperate, he reached out to Detective McCorder, ready to talk. By May 17, 2013, an arrest warrant for Martinez was finally issued. When he returned from a trip to Mexico, he was apprehended in Arizona. Martinez's only question to the authorities was simple: "Where is the warrant from?" Detective McCorder was the first to hear of Martinez's arrest. He immediately traveled to Arizona to personally escort him back to Alabama. During their journey, the two men shared conversations about life and even split a pizza at the airport. McCorder was struck by how little Martinez seemed to care about the fact that he was being charged with life-taking. Upon arriving in Alabama, Detective Watts joined the interrogation. Both detectives anticipated a lengthy battle, expecting Martinez to deny everything or at best admit to being at the scene but shift the blame to Romero. But the situation took an unexpected turn. Martinez confessed. Without hesitation, he admitted to unalive Ruiz. Then, shockingly, he confessed to the Florida life-taking as well, providing an eerie level of detail about the crime scenes, the number of bullets he used, and calmly stating, "If I hadn't done the job, someone else would have." But the confessions didn't stop there. Martinez requested the presence of Deputy Sheriff Crystal Darrington from Tulare. When she arrived in Alabama, Martinez dropped a bombshell. He wasn't just a life-taker, he was a contract hitman, responsible for numerous murders. One after another, he detailed the taking. He had unalived 22 people. Then 35. The number kept climbing. Darrington was floored. Frantically, she texted her superiors with every new confession. "Oh my God! Another one." The next day, the confessions continued. "I've got another," Martinez said nonchalantly. Ultimately, Martinez admitted to over 35 life-taking, and investigators now believe the actual count could exceed 40. Authorities didn't just take his word for it. They reopened every case and re-examined the details. In the end, they found Martinez's claims to be credible, and he was charged in multiple life-taking. However, not every case could be tied to him, and some life-taking remained unresolved. Martinez faced trial for many of his crimes. In Alabama, he was sentenced to 50 years for the unalive of Ruiz. In California, he received life without parole for 9 life-taking, and in Florida, he was handed 2 consecutive life sentences. At one point, he even faced the death penalty, but Martinez remained unfazed. "I know I'm going to get electrocuted," he once said. For years, Martinez managed to avoid capture. His life-taking left few clues. Often, no concrete evidence connected him directly to his victims. During the 80s and 90s, police resources in California were stretched thin, with too many murders and not enough investigators. But there was another heartbreaking reason why Martinez evaded justice for so long. Many of his victims came from marginalized communities, people with little power or influence. There was no public outcry over their deaths, and their families felt ignored. In fact, some of the victims' relatives later admitted to feeling that no one truly cared about their loved ones. This, more than anything, was one of the most tragic aspects of the case. The story of Jose Manuel Martinez, El Mano Negra, is a chilling reminder of how easily a life of violence can lurk behind the mask of an ordinary existence. From a 16-year-old seeking revenge to one of the most prolific life-takers in American history, his deadly path left countless victims in its wake. With over 35 confirmed murders and potentially more, the question lingers: how many lives were shattered before authorities finally caught up with him? If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and stay tuned for more true crime stories that will leave you questioning everything. Thank you for watching, and stay safe out there.